Forward. For some 40 years, more years than I like to think, I have been involved with the subject of power, within the ideas and in some degree the practice. During World War II, as the person in charge of price control, I was thought to be at the center of power, a location that conveyed an impression of greater authority to others than it did to me. At other times, in other positions, I have been on the margins, better situated to observe than to have influence. As to writing, my first book was subtitled The Concept of Countervailing Power. I there argued that an opposing exercise of power is the principal solvent of economic power, the basis defense against its exercise in economic affairs. I returned to power as the central theme of the new industrial state, which not quite alone. I consider my principal effort in economic argument. My presidential address for the American Economic Association a decade ago was on power and the useful economics. In it, I contended that economic divorced from consideration of the exercise of power is without meaning and certainly without relevance. I have reoccurred to the concept less formally a dozen times, maybe more. I have rarely encountered an article or treatise on the subject without looking to see how it was handled. If in any useful result at all, this book, I thought once of calling it an extreme essay, is what I have learned from experiencing, reading, writing, and associated effort at understanding. My claim is not to the whole subject, but to what I have learned about it. I have become persuaded over the years of the common factor that lie behind the usual references to economic, political, military, and religious power, and that include the power attributed to the press, television, and public opinion. These everyday references, since they do not indicate the underlying constants, regularly conceal as much as or more than they reveal. I have been concerned to make wholly visible these constants, to identify the sources of power in personality, property, and organization, and to see the instruments by which power is exercised and enforced. I hope, as one result, that my readers will henceforth have a more explicit sense of what that word embraces and what it implies in the particular economic, political, or other matter under discussion. As I have written on power, so I have read on it, and that reading has become a part of the inventory on which I have here drawn. I believe that some of my indebtedness is reasonably evident to Max Weber, to Bernard Russell, and to Adolf A. Bailey Jr., the diversely talented Rousseff, brain truster, diplomat, lawyer, and writer on social, political, and economic issues. It was Bailey who, more than anyone else, encouraged my interest in the subject. I also owe much to C. William Mill's classic, The Power Elite, to Charles S. Lyndon, Politics and Markets, to the varied economic writings of my friend Wallace C. Peterson, and to such interesting recent books as Richard Sennett's Authority and Dennis Wrong's Power, and to more. Like others, I am not always sure of the sometimes distant source of ideas I have accumulated. I am slightly more certain about the ideas I do not find useful. I suppose, for example, that I have been influenced by Machiavelli, but I have long suspected what Marx Lana has suggested that he is most frequently cited by people who have not read him. In telling of a lifelong interest in the subject of power, I must not seem to suggest even remotely that I have read all that has been written on it. No life is that long. There are some books that simply cannot be read, and there is much, I am sure, that I have missed. Everyone should be very cautious in his claims where the literature on power is concerned. There is a tendency on the part of those who write on power, including quite a few who write out of wide-ranging knowledge and intelligence, to allow the subject to drag them into dense complexity and deep subjectivity. One can understand the temptation. Complexity and subjectivity are a protection against critics who can be said to have missed the point. They are even more serviceable as an alternative to the toil and frustration of difficult clarification, but they are also a disguise for truth, a substitute for a clear, stark view of essentials. I have tried for such a view. I have sought to keep the sources and instruments of power constantly before the eyes of the reader, partly for this reason and partly for want of competence. I have sidestepped some issues, most notably, as I later tell, the role of the courts in the regulation of power. Also, I haven't hesitated to repeat what serves my argument or illustration. I will be sorry where such reiterations thought inadvertent or anyhow also so. I have wanted to be sure that the covering flesh having been stripped away, the anatomy of power stands fully revealed.